Good afternoon and welcome to our teaching webinars. This is series 2 in our teaching webinar series, and it's on clinical leadership. Today it's on loss and bereavement. Welcome to this EAPC webinar. My name is Patricia White and I'm a project officer with the EAPC. The webinar will start soon. We have a lot of people registered from around the world, so we just like to give people some time to join and to log in. So you know, once the webinar begins and the presentation starts, you can increase the size of the text, and you can also, for some, it's possible to translate into other languages. For your information, this webinar is being recorded, and this means that it will be available on our NursEduPal IMPACT website within the next week. We are recording all of the webinars and they'll be available as a resource, freely accessible to all over the world. As an attendee, we cannot see you or we cannot hear you, as the mic and camera are automatically switched off. But we would really like to engage with you. So we'll ask you to use the chat function. And we'll ask you to start using it from the very start. And we want to know where you're joining us from in the world. So if you could just find the chat button on your screen and just write in where you're joining us from. Wonderful. We can see we have people already from all over Europe and beyond. And you're all very welcome. A certificate of attendance is available for anyone who joins us here today on the live webinar. And at the end of the webinar, I'll post a link where you can complete a webinar evaluation form and download the certificate. It's very important that we ask you to fill in the evaluation form so we can see how the webinar is going and what we can do to improve for the following series. All that's left for me to say is that enjoy the webinar. We're delighted to have Sabina Peters join us today for the webinar and present, and I will hand you over to Danny now. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to all of you from Oulu in Finland, where I am a guest in the summer cottage of my dear Impact colleague and friend, Minna Höcka. I am Dani Verreke, coordinator of the NursEduPal IMPACT project and research coordinator at the School of Nursing at West University of Applied Sciences, and that is a task that I share with my colleague Veerle Coupé. Thank you for joining us in this last session in the second series of NursEduPal teaching webinars, in which we focus, as in all previous webinars from this series, on the generalist healthcare provider, not the specialist palliative care, not the palliative care specialist, I'm sorry. I would invite you to visit the project research page of our project website, because besides the webinar recordings and the presentation slides, all of our teaching materials and training materials will be available there, eventually in English, Romanian, Finnish, and Flemish. For the moment, the materials are only in English, but the rest is coming. All of the materials cover the themes and content of the webinars and are part of our commitment to support you on your path towards becoming a palliative care influencer. I have the pleasure to introduce today's speaker, and that is Sabina Peters. Sabina is a registered nurse with a master's in international development studies and a master in management and policy of healthcare. She is a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Healthcare in Zuid University of Applied Sciences, and that's in the Netherlands, where she also coordinates palliative care courses and internationalization. Sabina is passionate about innovation in palliative care education, and this is what made us cross paths. In 2022, I followed Sabine's online WIM program aimed at professionalization of teachers in palliative care education. Sabine was also involved in the wonderful O2PZ program that was aimed at making palliative care a compulsory topic throughout healthcare education in the Netherlands, something that I am particularly jealous about here in Belgium. In this last webinar, Sabine will talk about loss and bereavement, the final phase in the From Cure to Care scheme. Sabine, we're very pleased to have you with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Danny, for this nice introduction. I was very glad to see in the chat that we have so many nationalities joining us. But the topic that we will be discussing today, grief and loss in palliative care, it's not culturally divided. It can be, but moreover, it is personally, it is very personal. And I think in this webinar, I will discuss that as well. I'm hoping for a very interactive webinar. So I invite you all to really share your thoughts and really interact with us via the chat. So welcome to this webinar about grief and loss in palliative care. We will be talking about theories, coping strategies, and how to educate them. How to educate them, you can see that in a broad perspective, because you will be not only be educating your students or your colleagues, but maybe also yourself. And that's why I keep on emphasizing that grief and loss is very personal, also in palliative care. The introduction of Danny was sufficient, I think. If throughout the webinar you have any questions, please put them in the chat. If you have any questions afterwards, you can also send me an email and we will talk about it. First of all, I want to start with an interactive practice, and I would like to ask you to write down 3 things that are most important to you in your life at this moment. So please write it down. You can do it on paper, it's fine. It doesn't have to be in the chat. You can, but it doesn't have to be. But please write down 3 things that are most important to you in your life. So that can be certain things you own, but it can also be certain relationships you have. It can also be certain abilities that you have, or certain things in life that you do a lot. Maybe your work is very important to you. I hope that everybody has written down 3 things.
People are writing things down, Sabine. Do you want me to read them out for you?
Yes, I'm curious. Yes, please.
We have family, friends, and work, family, friends, and good health, family, good work, health. Oh, we see a theme coming up here, I think. Oh, yes. Autonomy, family, and friends, health. So a lot of similar, relevant things.
Yes. Well, I want to ask you, what if these things are slowly taken away from you without you having any possibility to change that? So you don't have any influence, but I want to ask you to strike down, to skip, to delete the first thing that you wrote down. So that thing is gonna disappear. You no longer have that. It might be painful.
I think it's very painful, Sabine, because many people wrote family as the first thing.
Exactly. So this is something very important for you, and you don't have any influence in losing that now. So if you look down, this is a first experience that you have of some sort of loss. And this might trigger some emotions in you. This might trigger some feelings. And that's something that I want to emphasize in this webinar as well. You are the only one who wrote that down. And now another person is telling you to skip that, to take that away. And you don't have any influence on that. So that's an experience of loss. And the human response to that is that you feel the loss. It comes with some emotions, some feelings that are not pleasant and that can be difficult to cope with. And that's something I want to emphasize in this webinar. Nothing human is strange to us. So the reaction to a certain loss is as human as we are ourselves. It's as personal as we are ourselves. And I want to ask you to go inside this webinar with that perspective. So please be aware of the personal aspects of what happens when people are experiencing loss or grief. And that might be a good opening point for this webinar, because we will talk about the theories on paper about grief and loss, and also the coping strategies in grief. But as you see in the picture as well, grieving and your own mind, it's as personal as a fingerprint is. So it differs per person. And that's why the theories are one part, but the real key to really explore the theories is to make it personal and make it patient-centered. In the second part, we will be talking about how you can educate these theories. So how you can educate your colleagues, yourselves, or your students into really using those theories and getting to know the theories. So as I said, please interact. So let's learn from and with each other. And we will do that by interacting in the chat. And I'm really curious about your insights as well, because every time I teach about this topic, myself, I also learn something new. And with an international audience like this, I'm very delighted in what we can learn from each other. So let's start. Why is grieving and bereavement, why is that important in palliative care? Well, as you see, the purple part of this figure, it is basically the last part of palliative care. And there you can see that aftercare and bereavement for the loved ones that are left behind after someone deceases, that's left, but that's also a responsibility for caregivers to include this care to the loved ones. And as you can see, the lines are not very strict. You can see a wobbly line, and that is really because the trajectory of grieving is as wobbly as that line. Sometimes you have ups, sometimes you have downs, but it's never a straight and easy path. It is almost always a difficult process. And you need to understand the ups and downs and that you need to cope with them. So as we can see, it is definitely an important part of palliative care. There is no time left to that, so there's no fixed time. But what do we know about grief and loss? What are existing theories that we have? Well, first of all, if we talk about grief and loss, what's it all about? I wanted to look into the definition of WHO. And I don't know if you have seen the definition of WHO about grief and loss, but it's non-existing. So even the World Health Organization does not have one fixed definition of grief and loss. So pay attention, people. This is the first indication of how complex this matter is. So who's the next best friend if you want to get to know information about a topic? Of course, Wikipedia. So I looked into Wikipedia, and actually the definition that they give is quite accurate. They say that grief is the response to the loss of something deemed important, particularly to the death of a person to whom or animal to which a bond or affection was formed. So that's already important. It has to do with something important. So every during New Year's evening, I make good resolutions for the next year. And if I actually lose some pounds after that, I will not be grieving those pounds. I will be very happy about losing those pounds. So not everything that you lose will cause grief. But if you have a bond or affection to it, then it's different. Then grieving can occur. And although conventionally focused on the emotional response to loss, grief also has physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, cultural, spiritual, and philosophical dimensions. So that means that grief even has more dimensions than only the emotional dimension. And that's very important to know. It's also an indication of how complex the matter really is. And bereavement refers to that state of loss, while grief is the reaction to that loss. So that's a big difference. And to make things more interesting, we will be talking about primary loss and secondary loss. And primary loss is really the initial loss. So that's the actual loss that occurs. That can be a diagnosis, so people are losing their abilities, physical abilities, cognitive abilities. But really, when people have an illness or when people die, that's really a primary loss. We also have secondary loss, and that is the additional losses that follow. So because your diagnosis, you get less social interaction with people and you lose social connections. Because of a certain diagnosis, you are no longer able to have the family role of a caring mother. Maybe when people have dementia and they no longer are able to cognitively recognize their siblings, then it can also be the losing of their family role. But also think about people who became physically handicapped and therefore lose their ability to work. So that's secondary loss. And that's a big difference because they can both hurt as much, but the feeling of control can be different in there. We also have ambiguous loss. And ambiguous loss is also called the loss that occurs when people are still there. So there are different types. You have the goodbye without leaving. And that means that somebody is physically there, but is no longer emotionally or relationally part of your life or not able to fulfill the desired role. So, for example, when you have a divorce, and it was not your choice, then you might still want that man to be your husband, but he's no longer your husband because you divorced. It can also be incarceration. So if somebody has to go into jail because of punishment and the person is physically still there, but he is in jail and therefore not able to fulfill the desired role as a loving father or as a partner. Also, chronic illness can also be goodbye without leaving. So people are still there, but they are no longer able to join you on family occasions, for example, or in dementia, or when there is a miscarriage. Those are all examples of ambiguous loss. So the person is still there, but no longer able to have that role in your life. We also have leaving without a goodbye. So that's when you are mourning a person who is physically gone, but you are not sure how they are. So people can be dead or can be vanished. And an example can be people who have wandering lives, who wander the streets and no longer have a safe place to live. But also people with addiction or children that you don't see anymore after a divorce. Those are all examples of people who are physically gone and you don't know how they are doing. So they are really out of the picture completely without saying goodbye. Then we have a situational goodbye, and that is the feeling of an ambiguous loss due to situations that affect feelings of loss. So that can be the loss in financial or personal security. think about the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's really the situation is causing a certain loss that you cannot choose. The situation is the way it is, but you still have a feeling of loss. So, for example, losing a house can also be the same. So those are three different losses, and they also call that a living loss. And what is very important in those living loss, that is that you continuously have an interplay between the primary and the secondary loss. So you don't only have the initial loss in which something disappears, but you also have all the consequences after that, the secondary loss. So we spoke about these three terminologies, bereavement, grief, and mourning, but what is the exact difference between those three? Well, let's start off with bereavement. Bereavement is really the state of having lost someone through death. So that means that you are the one left behind after somebody died. It's a condition or a situation of the people who are mourning a deceased loved ones. It's the beginning of an intense period of emotional adjustment. So it is a really difficult period, and it's really the state that somebody has after losing someone after death. Then grief. Grief is the internal emotional response to loss. So this is really a wide range of feelings. Think about sadness, anger, guilt, loneliness, feeling relieved even. But it's also a normal, a very natural and personal and fluctuating process. But it is a process of an internal emotional response. So this really has to do with the person himself. Then we have mourning, and mourning is really the outward expression of grief. So that means that what people see from behind, from the outside, of how you feel the sorrow and how you are working yourself through the loss. You can see in here that people have a lot of rituals or they talk about their losses. There are ceremonies or symbolic actions, and it's often shaped by culture, religion, or personal preferences. So the big difference is bereavement is really the state that somebody has. The grief is the emotional response somebody has, which is really internal. And the mourning are really the rituals and the ceremonies, the outward expression of grief. So those are the three terms that we have. And it's really important to, first of all, to really normalize the process of grief. Because, often grief is accepted, but still it doesn't have to take that long, and people don't really know how to respond to that. And we as teachers, but also as caregivers, have a certain responsibility in this, especially because it's the last phase of palliative care. So I have a question for you, and you can respond in the chat with true or false. So, have you ever been needing a time out for grieving after more than 1 year since the decease of a loved one? So, my question is, have you ever had the moment that you really needed a time out, which was even longer than 1 year after the death of a loved one? Is it true or false? If you have ever experienced a time out needing, then please say true. If you have never needed a timeout after 1 year, please say false. What are the responses, Danny?
We have a lot of yeses, true, traumatic.
Yeah.
Not everybody has experienced that, but most of the people that are typing something say that it is true.
Yeah. So people recognize that, and even after 1 year. Well, the reason why I'm asking you this is because I was also looking into normal versus abnormal grief. Because we can see a lot that grief is normal and there should be space for that and you should take it seriously. But if we look into the DSM-5 definition, we do have a certain diagnosis called prolonged grief disorder. So please notice, this is really a DSM-5 diagnosis. And they say this happens when you have intense distress and longing for the deceased, when you have a preoccupation with the loss impacting daily life, very important, and if you have symptoms of grief, so emotional pain, identity disruption, persisting for at least 12 months after the death. So that's pretty strange that even though it's a normal process, DSM-5 really puts a certain date in there, at least 12 months. And that's also something that is done in society in general. What they sometimes say is that after 12 months, all of the important dates, so the first holiday without your loved one, the first Christmas dinner without your loved one, the first birthday when the person is no longer there. But it's not true that it is over after 1 year. And we also have the terminology of abnormal grief, and that's not a formal diagnosis, but it is used when the criteria are not fully met to describe persistent and disruptive grief. Because I can also see that somebody experienced abnormal grief later in life. And of course, if you have the DSM-5 definition, that doesn't really say anything about the grief, if it's normal or not. But when it's really disruptive and impacting your daily life, yes, of course, then you need more assistance in there. And this abnormal grief, so the DSM-5 definition is too strict, but the abnormal grief is experienced by 5 to 15% of all adults. So it is a big problem in which we can have attention to it. And the good news is that we can influence that. We can improve grieving by having the correct interventions afterwards. So another question for you, true or false? You can only continue your life after you have given the grief a place in your heart. Is that true or false? So you can only continue life when you have given the grief a place in your heart. Is that true or false?
We have a false.
Mm-hmm. It's quite strict, huh? It says that you must put the grief, give a place in your heart. And only if you do that, only then you can continue your life. Well,
People find it a difficult question. Oh, we have another false.
Yeah. No, I think they were correct. Yes. It is actually false. And well, the theories of grief, when I give you a historical perspective, we see that this has been the tendency. Because we start with Sigmund Freud. He had a book about Trauer und Melancholia, so mourning and melancholy. And that book was really the blueprint for processing grief. And you only completed that after you let go of the deceased. So he really said, no, you first need to completely let go of the deceased. And only when you do that, you have finished grieving. Well, that was in 1917. And in 1969, we had Elisabeth Kübler-Ross from Switzerland. And she said that there were 5 stages of grief. She explored those stages of grief. She did a research amongst several patients, but there is no actual proof of existence or subsequency of the stages. So she said that you start with denial, then there comes anger, then there is bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. But I can already see in the chat, it can be more complex than this. And you can also see that patients tend to go around the certain stages. Some people even skip stages. So therefore, there is a lot of criticism on this model. And it is quite old already. We also had William Worden after that, and he said that there were 4 morning tasks. So he really said that if you want to do grieving and if you want to do mourning, you really have to do those tasks and fulfill them. And only after you fulfill them all, that's when you were successful in mourning. So it starts with accepting the reality of having someone lost. After that, processing the pain, adjust to the new reality of losing someone. And after that, finding an enduring connection with the life before somebody died and the life after somebody died. But also this, is not completely proven that people really have to do all those tasks and that there is also a subsequency. So what we think about the process of grieving is that the grief does not shrink over time, but we grow around our own grief. So if you can see the first picture with the pots on the top, you can see that the ball of grief goes smaller. But that's actually not true because the grief can remain the same size, but it becomes a part of you. And it becomes a part of you that you have to grow around it. And that's the second picture there under. So that's really important to understanding the process of grieving. It can be very complex and it is very complex. To illustrate this, we have the integrated process model of loss and grief. And there we can see that loss and grief can trigger various questions and various responses from people. They can be cognitive, emotional, physical, existential, and social. So there you can see that, for instance, the cognitive components of loss and grief, it can be reflective, that people really start thinking, what is my grief about? What am I actually missing? What did I lose? And then the physical awareness, how can I express my grief in a meaningful way? So how can I let others understand how I'm doing with my own grief? We also have the existential, that is really about having a meaning in life or meaninglessness. So that really means like, how can I find meaning or purpose in my new reality? So how does this loss change my view of life? And of course, you have the physical one between life and death. Which is really how you can live without a loss, how you can stabilize your body, because the physical components of grief are also there. And there you can see a really integrated process model of loss and grief, in which all those dimensions are impacted by grief. If we go to the dimensions of grief, we really see a holistic view. So you look at the person as a whole, and each dimension is always present during grieving processes. So physically, you see bodily reactions and changes. So the stress hormones increase, but you also have disrupted breathing. You can have less appetite. The energy can be less. But even nausea and pain can occur in grieving. The emotional part can be various feelings like sadness, anger, despair, but also emptiness, loneliness, longing for a person. In the cognitive part, we see changes in the cognitive functioning. So people have a different sense of reality. Maybe memory and concentration are lost, but also sensory changes. And in the social dimensions, we see a change in relationship and social functioning. So people are crying a lot, maybe hyperactive, not being able to bond again after they lost someone. They can also be restless. And the existential part can be questions about meaning and life purpose. So people ask themselves, why me? Is it my fault? Who am I now without this person? What is the meaning of my life? What is truly important to me? And that's the thing that I ask you in the beginning, of course. So if we look at coping strategies in grieving, I have another question for you. What do you think? Is there a difference in coping with grief between men and women? Is that true or is that false? So there's a difference in coping with grief between men and women. True or false? What I do see is that the brain of the women are more colorful in this picture, but I don't know what that says.
We have false, true, false, true, false, true.
We have a good mixture.
No.
Wow. And let's see, we also have mixed genders maybe, so that's good to see the mixture. Well, to be honest, I wouldn't have the answer to this as well. What scientific research does show is that men are often more focused on the practical part and that women tend to do more in the feeling part. We see that in scientific research, but it's just as in the beginning what I said, that it's so personal. So you can have a man who only wants to be talking about his feelings, and you can also have a woman who really wants to be very practical and clean up the house after somebody died. So there is not one man reaction or a one woman reaction. It's really as personal as the person itself. But what is a good model is the dual process model. So that comes from Stroebe and Schut. They come from the Netherlands. And they described a dual process in which we oscillate between loss-oriented and restoration-oriented. And we oscillate between that, so it's going back and forward as we process our grief. So loss oriented is really looking backwards to what we have lost and what we are missing. And restoration oriented is really focused on the now and the future, really trying to rebuild the disrupted life. Both phases are stressful and there is no ending point for grief. But it really does mean that the oscillating part, so going back and forward through those phases, they also require different support. So it is important to know about this process and to also know that it is very normal to go back and forth. So in the loss-oriented, we really have the grief there. So denial, avoidance, but also the intrusion of grief. And in the restoration-oriented part, we have doing new things, finding distraction, denial, the grief, finding new roles or identities and relationships. And really, grieving is all about finding a balance between these both phases. And that is always causing a stressful period, and that's very normal. Another question I have for you. Time can heal all wounds. Is that true or false?
We have a false.
Capital letters, false even. Yeah.
More false.
Yes.
False. There seems to be consensus this time.
And to be honest, this is something that a lot of people still say to the bereaved. So people really say like, just give it a year, just wait for a couple of months. You'll feel much better after that and just give it some time. Well, grief doesn't work that way. Grief doesn't work in a way that you can give it time and then it will magically disappear. And that's also what I see here. Wound festers if not dealt with. And that is true. So it's not that you can just give it some time and then everything will magically be okay. Grief can be hard work. Grief can be very hard work. And I see a question also about grief can be different with conditions such as a cerebrovascular accident or Parkinson or dementia. Yes, if you recall the dimensions that we just showed of grief, then you can see that, for example, dementia does have an impact on the cognitive part of grieving. Parkinson can have an impact on the physical part of grieving. So yes, grief can be very different with a condition. And that's why we always say to people, look into grief as a holistic process. So see the people as a whole. And I also want to share you some worldwide lessons in grief. So in grief, we can learn from the Mexicans that celebrating life alongside mourning and invite spirits can also give you some relief from grieving. We can also see it in New Zealand. There they have funerals, which are really big with a lot of people. The whole community is there, and they use a lot of storytelling. And that can help you to preserve a loved one's memory and the legacy that somebody had. We also have the Obon Festival. That's in Japan. That's when they honor their ancestors, and the families celebrate to show respect to their ancestors. So they also clean the graves. They have ceremonies. They guide the people with lights, and they really foster the continuity between past and present. So they acknowledge that past will always be there, but you also have to look forward to the present. Um, and then the traditional funerals in Ghana. There we see that those funerals take several days and they are really dedicated to solidarity in mourning and celebrating the deceased as a collective process. So in there, it's also very normal to give gifts to the persons who are left behind. You can also see that the graves that they have are really nicely made. So it's really in solidarity with the whole community. And I think those are good lessons from the world in which some of us can still learn something. Um, Two, how to educate in grief and loss, because the basic the overall approach of grief should be that the grieving process should always be normalized and also de-involved emotions. It is a normal process and it is okay to have those emotions. Do not avoid the subject because hidden or unspoken grief hurts even more. So if you know that there is a mother who has lost her child, do not, and she had 3 children, but one of them lost, then talk about her children as a whole and not only about the 2 that are still alive. And sometimes listening is alone is already enough. Because as we saw also in New Zealand, storytelling can help. And people often want to speak about their loved ones, even after they have died. Be attentive to triggers such as dates, events, and memories. So if you know that a person would always go through a fun fair with her husband, but her husband is no longer alive, yeah, maybe you can ask her to join her this year. Maybe you can start a new tradition with her even, but be attentive to those triggers. And encourage healthy distractions to shift focus and relief. Because as we saw in the model of Margaret Struwe, it is very normal to go back and forward through those phases. Offer concrete support, not only the vague, yeah, if there is anything I can do, let me know. People will not let you know. But if you go to them and ask them, hey, on Monday I have to start cooking a big dish. Do you want to join me? Then I will bring you some food and we can share the food together. That's a big difference, and that is more concrete support. We also spoke on how you can educate those models. Well, the dual process model of Struwe and Schut can be very nicely taught by standing your ground. That is an exercise in which you ask students to think about one leg as their loss-oriented leg and one leg as their restoration-oriented leg. And then ask them about a situation in which they lost something. And then if they stand on one leg, which is loss oriented, they really need to think about everything that they lost, the grieving, really the difficulties of changes that it brings. And if you let them stand on the other leg, they will be more restoration oriented. So then they can think about restoration oriented thoughts. So what are new things that you can do? What can be a new role that you can have? How can you change? How can you adapt to that change that is now there because of the loss? And you will see that people start in a disbalance if they really stay too long on the loss-oriented leg, or if they stay too long on the restoration-oriented leg. And that's when you can illustrate that it's all about balance. So that the thoughts must be on both sides, and it's really up to them to find a balance in there. So that's a really, really nice exercise that you can do. It really comes to the people because they really feel what is happening. They feel that they are losing their balance. And then if they find the balance, they are really standing their ground. Another exercise that, or another thing that I teach my students regarding grief is that a lot of patients, if they are really ill, you have the family who is asking, nurse, how long will it take? How long will it take until my loved one dies? And well, students respond to that in different ways. Sometimes they say, well, I don't have a crystal ball, or they say, well, the doctor will come to you shortly and they will give you the answer. But the honest answer is that the nurses, they can't know. Even the doctor doesn't know. But that's not what family wants to hear. The family wants to have some sort of advice. They are really looking for some support, something they can hold on to. And a metaphor that they can hold on to is the metaphor of candles. As you can see here on the picture, you see those very small and narrow candles. They are also very cheap. You can buy them in the church in touristic places. But you can imagine if that light, if that candle, if it breaks, well, the flame goes out immediately. But if you have like a thicker candle, something that is used in baptism or something that is used during a Christmas celebration in church, then they always take out the very good candles, the big ones, the wider ones. And you can imagine that those will stay, they will be lighted for a longer time. But for both candles, it is the same. As soon as the wind goes by and blows them out, then both candles are out. So, and also when you turn them over by accident, then they will also go out. So that's the metaphor of people's life. You don't know how much how much power that they still have. But if they have a lot of power, like the thick candle, even then a small wind has to blow and then the person also dies or the candle goes out. But also with the longer, narrow ones, well, they can go very quickly, but also if they break, then the candle also goes out. So it's not only depending on all the resources that a person has themselves, but it's also reliant on external factors. And that's why the end of life phase is as unique as the person itself. And if you tell that to families, it gives them more to hold on to than just saying, I don't have a crystal ball. This is also a model that I would like to show to you. It's the diamond model of Carlo Legette. And he's really giving you a model how to talk about the processes that are going on when people are at the nearly end of their life. It's called the Ars Moriendi model, and that really means the art of dying. But these conversations and these example questions can be used to start the conversation about that. And you can see the diamond has all the dualities in there, but in the middle you have inner space. And that inner space means that somebody has to be open to talk about it, but you as a caregiver also have to be open to speaking about it. They have evolved this model into an integral grief model from Legette and Gulden. And there they combined the diamond model and the multi-dimensions of grief. And this can give you some insights in the processes that people are going through when they have grief. And it also recognizes the complexity and individuality of grief. So this is also a very interesting model that you can use for students to show them the complexity of grief. My final part is another interactive part that I want to ask you. When looking back into your life, because we started with something personal and I want to end with something personal. When looking back at your life, I want you to consider what would be the soundtrack of your life. So we say the 5 of your life, and they normally use this as some sort of inspiration about thinking about your own saying goodbye already. So at your own funeral, which music do you want to have played? So think about 5 tracks of your song, and they can be about something that you really love. So please write it down in the chat. And they can be songs that remind you of your first love. They can remind you of strong emotions, a certain life phase, but maybe also your family or another important meeting. Please write down one song in the chat that reminds you of that. Deep calls to deep. And this can also be very inspirational for all of us, that we can get to know new and nice music. So which songs remind you about something? And I can see Antonella says respect. Maybe it's Aretha Franklin with Respect. Very powerful song, of course. Ah, yeah, it is. I thought I lost you then. Even the titles of the songs. Ah, I did it my way, Roland says. Must be Frank Sinatra. That's also, all the titles are already very, very powerful. Well, I can see Mijn leven is van mij, so My Life is Mine. It's a musical, yes, I know. And the traditional songs of Sovereign's country. Yeah. Well, maybe that's your, I don't know if I can say it like that, but your home assignment. Maybe this is something that you might want to discuss with your loved ones, because I don't know if they know what you would want. And having more control over the grief period is also talking about things like this. So I would really like to encourage you, maybe tonight during dinner, throw it at the table. Try to formulate the 5 of your life. It will be interesting conversations in any case, and maybe you even find out some really nice new music. So yeah, that's going to be the home assignment. Think about the soundtrack of your life, the 5 of your life. Well, that's it for now for this webinar. I would like to thank you all for your attention and your interaction. Are there any questions or do you have any ideas or feedback? Feel free to share them in the chat. I can also see my family dismisses any talk about mortality. That can also be. So soundtrack of your life sounds even better than talking about mortality. And yes, Roland, you have the take-home message right there. Grief is not just grief. True. And thank you, Andreas. Okay. And feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn as well. And as I said, if there are any questions or ideas popping up after this, feel free to contact me and hope to hear from you. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sabine, for this nice presentation. I think I will now hand over again the word to Patricia because she always has some closing things to tell us. But I will tell you that as in September, I think we have the last webinar series of the NursEduPal at Impact project. It will be headed by our Finnish team of DIAC, and it will be about moral ethical leadership. And that will be 4 webinars.
Thank you, Danny. And thank you, Sabine. That was great. As we mentioned, this is part of the series on clinical leadership. And all of these recordings are available on our website and as a free resource to you. So keep an eye on our website and our LinkedIn page, and you will be able to see the details of those webinars that Danny was talking about that will be coming after the summer. All that's left for me then is to thank Sabine for your fabulous presentation, to Danny for chairing throughout all of the sessions in this series, and to Guillermo, my colleague in EAPC, for all of his technical support in the background. What I have here is a link to a certificate of attendance and to an evaluation form. And finally, I would like to thank all of you for attending and for your interaction during the webinar. It makes it very special when we have people interacting. So thank you for your attendance. Please let your colleagues know about the resources that are available. And we look forward to seeing you at our next series. In the meantime, keep in touch through our LinkedIn and through our website. Thank you very much. I will leave this page up for another minute just so that you can access the QR code. Thank you.